Motion is to to put yourself in physical motion, action, to emotion.
It could be the other way around too. It could be the other way around too. Emotion creates motion as well.
That's right.
So it's a circular.
And obviously the secret is knowing the balance point between the two. When do I need to set myself in motion to feel something I need to feel versus sitting to do the same thing? Because if you sit too long, then the emotion can become like stagnant water because there's no movement. So there's always this critical...
both sides of Mercury are mutable, the Gemini and but the Virgo is an Earth, and so I see Virgo as habits. And I read a couple weeks ago.
No, habits are the moon.
Are they the moon?
The moon. Habits, daily habit.
What about like routines and thinking? Perpetual ways of thinking. Wouldn't that be Virgo?
Perpetual ways of thinking, yes.
So that would be. Seems to me that it would be like the mental habits you have.
Mental habits, yes.
Yeah.
I'm talking about our daily. Where we live with ourselves is the moon on a minute-to-minute basis. That describes our ongoing reality second to second. How we're living within ourselves. We come through the moon. Obviously, it's the egocentric structure. And it's through the moon that we establish our daily habits. You see? Because it's part of one's security equation. The need for self-consistency. It's an integration point for the ego. Consistency now. Doing same thing. Habit. It's like person X can wake up and go brush their teeth and leave cap off toothpaste. Habit. Put a Virgo in that same bathroom, well, you see? Yeah. So, mental routines, you're right. Habitual ways of thinking, you're right.
What got me thinking is a week or two ago, Yogananda said that there's so little free choice because of the habits. We are perpetually run by our habits. And
that's not to say there's not free choice to break those.
There is. And that's why when I see Virgo, I see the square to Sag. And so I think that it's a good idea to replace some of the negative the habitual negative thoughts with positive affirmation, Sag. So like if the Virgo mind is saying, say someone has Virgo on the 4th, and they've habitually negative their own image. It's just simply replace that with the square to Sag. And via the square to Sag, positive affirmations about yourself. So whenever you think...
Well, you're right, and the general, bigger way to present that, because again, Virgos tend to be so negative. Just a negative focus, focusing on this problem and this thing to fix, and life is just a complication, and nothing's ever quite good enough. And that's because of the original negative relationship they had with themselves. That's the cause. And we'll show you in a minute how to fix this, but one of the things, the trick that you want to do with Virgo types, particularly the really deepest complainers, everything's wrong, fuck you, I'm a bitch all the time, and is really to get them to reroute their inner focus of life. And the way that I do this with so many is to get them to truly focus on what is good in their life. To just focus on the good things. What is good? And this tends to have the effect of making all these perceived shitty things come through this positive forward-looking focus. And if they can do this over time, they're changing what's going on in their left brain, even under perception pattern. So it works for the ones that want to do it. And this is where you really can determine where Virgo's invested, if they're willing to do something that gets them away from what's perceived as an existing problem. If they set something in motion to do it, fine. If they have the knowledge and still don't do it, then what's that suggest? They need to keep their problems. And that's when the counselor, I don't care what discipline they come from, needs to away. How about a 45 Magnum? That'll take care of it. Perfect solution. No more problems. And be sadistic while you do it? No. You maim and torture first? No.
When you get this unhappy Virgo situation, they actually need to keep the problem. They know they need to, I'm talking about this all in the third person. What does that mean? They just haven't got the lesson yet? They're not ready to move on?
No, it means that the causative factor in that is still this incredibly inner negative relationship and the guilt that surrounds it, that then connects back to this deep unconscious voice, I don't deserve goodness. And as long as that remains in operation, no change will happen.
So how do we get to the root of that change?
The person has to change the inner relationship to himself. So this is, I'm going to share with you now a strategy you can give masochists that are truly interested in change, because it does start with changing their inner relationship to themselves, combined with changing their cosmology. And you see again the link back to Taurus, the inner relationship to oneself, triad, the inner side of Venus. And so how this thing starts out, you have the person sit down, piece of paper, make a line down the center, and in the left column you have the person write down every negative / wounding message that has been projected upon them. Because of course this is what masochists attract. Negative messages as a reflection of their own inner relationship. So you have the person write all that shit down. You want to tend to suggest take a week to do that part, just to make sure it's thorough and complete. And then in the right column, you have the person write down what are called counteractive thoughts. Thoughts that will deliberately counteract each remembered negative message. For example, let's say person X told me last year, Green, you're a piece of shit. The counteractive message would be actually, I'm a giving, loving, nurturing person, which I am. This happens to be a person's projection. So there has to be now written down just as many counteractives to match the remembered negative message. The next step is like a cassette in a blank tape, and with the power of their own voice, putting the counteractive messages on the tape. And the last and most vital step, which will be a reflection of shamanistic / natural law, Sagittarius square, Pisces polarity. And just before they go to sleep, they put this tape on low volume. At that point, go to sleep. It's necessary that they keep sleeping, so it cannot resist the incoming messages. So typically you want to build in 35-minute, 40-minute lead time, the silence on the tape. Turn it on when you lay down, go to sleep. You sleep, now messages come on. And then as a person's sleeping, these counteractors will enter the right ear and now begin to directly access the subconscious where the problem lies. Because see, no amount of cognitive work will ever change this pathology of masochism. Why? The messages are in the subconscious. So you have to directly access it. So these new messages now will access the subconscious. And now progressively begin to restructure that subconscious relative to the nature of the counteractive messages. And this will progressively change that person's inner relationship to themselves, which is then changing the quality and nature of their own personal vibration magnetism. Venus, Taurus. So once they change their inner relationship, simultaneously changing vibration magnetism, then what they create to themselves, based on internalized change, circumstantially speaking, the people in those circumstances now will reflect what has been changed here. You see? That's how it's done. Jennifer has actually got through this program. She's done this. She can testify. You want to share your experience?
I've done it, and then I wasn't actually doing it. I wasn't doing it consistently for a while, but I've been doing it consistently every single night for the last almost 6 months. And I was just telling Jen this morning how thankful I am, because even just the people that manifest the situations, I mean, it's like a miracle, really.
It is. That's Pisces, miracle.
Every day I'm like, oh my gosh, thank God. Because I wasn't conscious, I mean, I was, getting myself through these victim roles. And of course I was unconsciously like, oh, I want to be a victim, but I was bringing in all this negative stuff. And so this really is like reconstructed or reprogrammed.
So here's a testament to the proof of this healing technique. Yes?
Yeah, I had started the left column. No problem.
Okay.
The problem lies where
Counteractive.
I can't come up with a positive affirmation or construct or whatever. And the question is, can I just sort of make it up?
Yes, because whatever you make up is what you need to make up in the first place. It manifests as that kind of thought.
Okay.
See? Okay.
And then to do it in first person, like, I am intelligent, I am beautiful, and they're all positive. And for smoking too, like, instead of I don't smoke, I love not smoking, or I love to be free from nicotine, or and then it's a process too.
And see what happens too when you start working with like that. Also check in their chart to see if in fact the Aquarian archetype is being emphasized, because if the Aquarian archetype is emphasized by a personal planet or a south node in Aquarius, it then means that that person has the capacity to create a reality via thought, as long as they believe in that thought 100%. This is what's called affirmation. But when you link this to specifically Aquarius, this then means on that counteractive list that they can actually put under that list what they want their life to become in as much detail as they wish, even down to writing down the right part, and if this Aquarian thing is in there and it now gets programmed to the subconscious, guess what's going to happen? It happens.
I've been pretty careful because I started doing this tape. And first I had to redo it because I was putting I don't want.
I don't want, yeah.
And I have a planet in Aquarius, and Aquarius trines all my personal planets. And I've been doing it for about 4 months. And I just healing things have started to happen. Not so much a lot of new people, but one incredible new person in my life who's helped me heal a whole, just because she loves me unconditionally. I never had that before. It kind of blows me away, but I'm accepting it.
So you're starting to see the results of it too.
It's starting, but it's kind of...
Jeff, you told me to do this back in the summer, and I created the tape, and I did it one night. And I didn't sleep that 30 minutes. I didn't hear the part about blank for 30 minutes while you go to sleep. I just had talking. And I was up all night. I couldn't sleep. And the next day I was like so pissed.
Wow.
And then I put it on, I said, oh, okay, I have a solution. I'll put it on 3 times.
To make sure, yeah. Virgo Delta. That's why you build in this lead time.
Does it need to be audible? I mean, can you have it like so?
Low volume. When you're asleep, the last thing that dies is the right ear. Even when you don't have breath in your body, you hear. This is what Tibetans know. This is when the soul's talked out, even after the breath is stopped. This is how powerful it is right here. So yeah, it can be on just the minutest volume. So you can actually sleep. You're taking it in. If I get close to my baby who's sleeping and I need to share with something to this baby that it can only be done in silence, when the baby isn't conscious, I get close to the ear and whisper. The baby still sleeps. Goes in there, then you see behavioral change.
But always the right ear.
Because what we hear here goes here. So what we're now doing is restructuring the left brain.
Oh, that's why I'm sitting on my head.
There you go.
Make suggestions in regards to creativity, skills, or abilities, or to develop the right brain. You whisper things on their left ear, then.
Yes.
And for the Aquarian types, how would you structure the sentence of wanting to create some reality?
It's simple. You leave it. Yes, you can. Make it really simple. You only say "I want" if it's in fact consistent with what's possible for you. I mean, if I don't have the capacity to be president of the United States, I can write that on my list. I want to be president, but it's not going to happen. So you have to make sure that what is possible or not on what's on the list.
You're supposed to say I am, isn't that true, rather than I want, because you're supposed to accept it as being true now?
What's that?
You're supposed to say I am, whatever you want, not I want, when you go into the subconscious?
You can say "I want" if you want to. What's wrong with those choice of words?
It's like putting it out there in the future. Instead of putting it out there in the future. This is all the different books that claim that you should never say I want.
Oh. Fucking $2.95 Safeway books. I mean, stop it. It's rubbish. Right back to all the should-be crap. What's right? What's wrong? It's all this min shit. Life is much more natural than that.
How do you identify an Aquarian type, or when we get to that place?
If there's planets in their birth chart that are being through,
Like a stellar planet?
it can just be Mercury in Aquarius, or a Moon in Aquarius, or Mars in Aquarius.
Any of
Yeah. As long as you have at least one personal planet in Aquarius, that capacity exists.
Even if it's Saturn.
Even if it's Saturn, especially if it's Saturn. Saturn correlates with our reality. The word reality is a Saturnian word.
I have so many experiences happen to me that I just would use my imagination. I have images come through and happen. Just for mere intuition, but like I would want something to happen and that happens. You know, I just think about it and I think.
Well, that's Aquarius.
The same would be true with affecting personal planet.
Yeah, I would say yes, but in a bit more limited fashion, because that's more of an oblique there. You know, you can see charts where the Aquarian archetypes emphasize in different ways, 3-4 planets in the 11th house. South Node in Aquarius, Uranus rising, maybe receiving 6-7 aspects. Then you're looking at a Uranian emphasis anyway. But if it's kind of snuck over here in a part of the chart that is only receiving a few minor aspects, no.
But Aquarius on the ascendant, or would you just say Uranus on the ascendant?
No, Aquarius on the ascendant would apply. Yeah, a new evolution cycle. So to develop that capacity.
You mentioned the South Node Aquarius. Would the North Node Aquarius have the same?
That's the same as the ascendant. They're developing that quality. South Node is already developed.
But Uranus conjunct the South Node.
Sorry?
Uranus conjunct the South Node.
It's already developed.
Uranus, the ruler of the 7th house, and in the 7th house, 1 degree of Pisces, trine Pluto. Uranian.
What's your question?
You were talking about how to see Uranian emanations from, shall I have my seventh house cusp is in conjunct is in the seventh house, making a trine to Pluto also.
Well, unless I see other parts of the chart, I would say that you've been, is that you?
Yeah.
Then that suggests to me that over the last several lifetimes, in your own way, you've been trying to teach other people how to do that, to the extent that you've begun to lose your own capacity to do it. You've given too much of it away.
I just wanted to bring up a real quick thing too, 'cause with the tape, another Virgo thing is the tape's never good enough. You keep changing the tape. That's what I was doing for a while. I'd make it and then I'd be like, oh no, I want it, and then you change on tape and the consistency, and you leave it, be happy with it, you don't change it for at least like 6 months.
I wanted to add to mine. Oh,
Right about that.
I'm sorry?
Is she right that you should just leave it alone once you do it, not to keep changing it?
It's okay to change it with little variations, but not like a whole new tape. Because there can become awarenesses along the way that are triggered based on the implementation of the original procedure. And all of a sudden new thoughts flying in because of that you would like to program, so to speak, into your subconscious. So it's okay to add things like that, but not totally alter the original tape.
I've got one more question, Jeffrey. I've been noticing that I have the ability, I got 5 planets in the 11th house. I will attract simultaneously that which I fear and also that which I desire. And it's like, it's so powerful.
Do you have Mars in the 11th? Do you have Mars there?
No, Mars is the 9th. Moon, Sun, Saturn, Pluto, and Mercury are all in the...
Moon, Sun...
Saturn, Pluto, and Mercury are all in the...
Pluto. So look what you've just said.
Yeah.
That connects exactly what you just said. Pluto there.
So I'm attracting what I fear. I'm aware that I'm attracting what I fear. And it built up this fear cycle.
The intention, though, in doing that is an 11th house intention, which is to liberate. And the only way to liberate is to recreate it in order to go through it. You can't avoid it through all the Virgo.
So to go through it, to embrace it with love, or to say, whatever technique I use, that's the intention.
Right.
Oh, I'd be doing the right thing after all.
Despite the Virgo. Maureen.
I was wondering, as a child, if you speak into their right ear, I guess I have some concern about, like, my agenda versus their agenda, kind of thing, or maybe taking over their karma, or trying to alter with my not having maybe. I guess I have a concern about saying what I think is right into a child's ear.
Well, since you're doing astrology, just whoever the child may be, get your hands on their birth chart.
Right.
Objectify the child. Then whatever it is you need to put in the right ears in conformity with their actual reality, not yours.
So that they would go to what they need instead of what you think they need.
There you go.
Mm-hmm. I have been whispering into my cat's right ear. Her eyes look less wounded. She's been coming into the jumping up on the sofa when somebody else is in the house.
It works.
And I'm not the one that noticed. I'm not the only one that notices in her eyes.
Mm-hmm.
When did come by to say that?
Now this should probably tell us something about the nature of animals' intelligence.
Language, yeah.
Hmm?
They don't know. Well, because if she's whispering words, cats don't speak in language, she's still getting.
They register vibration and tonality.
I had an experience with my nephew that I believed past where took him away from his mother to save him because there was no other way. And after I dreamt, he was angry with me and I never mentioned anything, but he separated from me for a while. And I got a little anxious because I didn't know what to do because I knew that he's a 1-year-old boy. And I knew that he felt what I released through that dream in the past life. And then one day I decided to whisper into his ear that to ask him to forgive me and to actually tell him that what I did was the best I could do at that moment to save his life. And I just kind of talked about a little bit about what happened in that lifetime, and he shifted completely because I think he was angry with me because what I did in that lifetime. And so I just whispered what I had felt, what I went through at that moment, and he shifted his energy totally.
There you go.
And just by talking, whispering to his ear.
But you also, within the report, also see the incredible value of honesty. No matter where the chips fall, where they may. Because honesty creates right reality, even if it's awful. So by you being honest with him, which is what you were doing.
Yeah. But it was amazing that I dreamt, and I saw it very vividly. And the next day, because he was very close, I see him every day. And the next day, he avoided me, he rejected me, he didn't want to be close energetically. I did feel that. And so I felt a little of guilt and of shame because I knew, well, it was just a dream, but I was a past because it was so vivid and so clear. And then after I talked to him, it took me like a couple days to realize that what I needed to do is talk to him, because I tried to talk with him at the etheric, but I needed to talk with him physically. He shifted. It was just amazing.
Well, see what you're describing. Let's use an analogy. You put in motion something in his consciousness to counteract something that was there. This becomes analogous to if I throw a rock into a lake that's still, then you have ripples. So when you first make this message, it's like the rock making ripple, the shift, the change in the surface, and it takes a while for those ripples to calm down, doesn't it? So what you did is you put in the rock. It took him for a while for the ripples to become even, i.e. readjusted. That's what you're describing. So, for those that are working with masochists, and or if it's yourself, you might want to try this here strategy.
How long can you play?
4 to 6 months. Every night. This is a deliberate test by God, because it has to be done every single night, 4 to 6 months, knowing that if you miss just one night, you've broken the thread, and you have to start over. This is a deliberate test from God. Why? Again, a hallmark of masochistic nature, not doing for themselves what they should do when they should do it. The rational and the justified, that's where this comes in. Remember, Lois? You have to do it too. So, every day?
I do it. I ever since you gave me that reading,
Right on. Good.
it helped me to overcome an attraction that I had to a relationship that I was trying to really help work that.
Right on. Okay. Let's do the anatomy and the physiology then. It's not much to add to it since we did Mercury, Gemini thing. And what you have now here through Virgo is a direct link to what is called the peristaltic action of the colon and the intestine. This is why when people typically get nervous or stressed out, and all of a sudden they're impacting on their ability to have the colon and the intestine operating correctly. And when that's the case, I mean, when you connect it back to Capricorn, one of the classic symptoms of Capricorn is called constipation. And you can see how this is triggered clearly through peristaltic action and the impact on the colon and the intestine. We have a direct application now. We also have direct applications into the larynx, speaking thing, voice box. larynx. And Mercury has a direct application to the tonality of one's own speech. Why is it that you think every human being, like fingerprints, has a tonality that it's unique to itself? No two people speak in exactly the same tonality or vibration. Why is this? What does it symbolize? I'll just leave for that. You think about that. It's a deep question.
Of everybody being an individual? Would it be just the symbolism that everybody's different, everybody's an individual?
It's deeper than that. When we listen to somebody's voice, we're taking in a way, the essence of that person. So if you follow that line of thinking, just take it further, and you'll be amazed what you realize. I mean, why is it this, person X decides to have blue eyes, and this one brown eyes, and it's the same deal.
You're giving up a lot of essence these days, aren't you?
What's that?
You're giving up a lot of essence of yourself.
Well, I mean, if you're actually within me, the answer would be no. To me, everything's, this stupid system, this water moving through the faucet to me. And, frankly, I have a real distinct sense of self, so I'm in so many bodies at the same time. Which one do you say is yours? Which one do you identify with? Speaking box, or larynx, the vocal cords. And of course the throat chakra. And a direct correlation to the sheathing on the nerves. Sheathing is a gift wrap on a package. And this means when we get stressed out or nervous, we're tearing apart the sheathing, the nervous system becomes overheated. Somebody touches you in that moment, you jump or you hit. So, what it comes down to.
So does that make multiple sclerosis more in the Virgo than the Gemini? Uranus?
It's a combination, but ultimately it's caused by Uranus manifesting through Mercury. There's a real breakdown there is in the synapsal structure and the dendritic formation. The message is not being purely communicated or received. There are ways to work with that. There's a real good homeopathic substance called Gelsinium. Gelsenium. To give you an example of how dramatic this can be, do you mind a digression for a moment? You mind me digress for a moment? We had a client up in Seattle many years ago, a 16-year-old boy, and classified this learning disability and that disability and autistic that and his mother was totally dead. She finally brought him in to see me. They came together. Again, typically counselors of last resort. And it was such a clear case of, in his case, that all of his life had been skin, nomadic, and here he found himself in white skin. So right away you see the complication. All these lifetimes are coming out of the right brain, living naturally. And suddenly put in the left brain, white skin, learn in 2 ways out of 82. So it was an absolutely foreign routine to him. And as a result of this fact, his various synapsal structures were not wired, as to date, to learn in this way, or to even put his process in that way. So, in fact, he didn't have any of these learning problems. He was just coming into life this way. And so it was a really easy deduction to make. And so, in that case, what we ended up doing with this compound galsinium in mind, and keeping in mind that the polarity to the brain is your feet. So what we did in his case was we had him grind up these the homeopathics, the little white pills, and grind them up into powder, and actually put it between his foot and the sock, so walking on it, both feet. And this created a natural polarization. First we have grounding, which then osmosed through, i.e. current grounding, which then osmosed through the foot to brain. And in 2 weeks, is already functional. So dramatic that the teachers in the school district, the state, what did you do, this boy? So you might want to think about galsinium.
I have a client with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, which is kind of like a multiple sclerosis, but very every day she's losing movement of her muscles in a very rapid way.
Then get her involved immediately with, there's a Chinese herb that can help, and also for the other case, because it creates new dendrite formations when taken. And it's an herb out of China called Foti, F-O-T. Yeah, this works wonders. And I mean, a perfect, I've got a daughter who was born with what's called Turner syndrome, and no ovaries, and out of 48 double Ys, 45 are split or damaged. They're not supposed to have motor skills. They can't do this, and they can't do that. And if you listen to the stupid fucking doctors, and my doctor is telling me, she's not going to do this, she's not going to do that, and you have to typical doctor rap, yeah. I said, well, thanks for your information, but fuck you. And as soon as I found this out, I got home and started giving her the Foti immediately. And at the same time, because it was true at that time, she had no motor skill. And so I asked her to start making beadwork, to make beadwork. And sure, in the beginning, but in combination with the Foti, relative to persistence. And when she finally reached grammar school shit, perfect cursive. Perfect cursive. So right on down the line. And this is showing you that the capacity of the brain can fix itself. It can pass apparently damaged areas. It is obviously. So the issue becomes how to affect that or cause it. And one of the herbs that work that is tea. Even if you added that with ginkgo biloba, which creates all this oxygenization, put a lot of oxygen into the brain. You can imagine now combine this with full. It's a pretty dramatic thing there.
Is there a problem in doing analysis of separating the Virgo function of Mercury and the Gemini function of Mercury?
I'm sorry, I missed him.
We're talking the function of Mercury as ruler of Virgo, all right?
Mm-hmm.
How do we separate that from the function of Mercury?
Because the Mercury function of Gemini is to collect information,
All right, okay.
and the Virgo function is to analyze it, compartmentalize it, to find how one fact connects to the next fact.
And Virgo is more concerned with health than Gemini.
Yes, obviously. See, from a health point of view, the way you want to think of health through the sixth house, and this is a pretty big confusion in astrology, is that the sixth house correlates with physical ailments or problems we can create that are based or caused by interacting with our environment. Whereas the 12th house are what we call systemic issues, genetic. It's part of the Scorpio triad. That what you're born with versus what you're creating because of the environmental interface.
If you have, all right, okay, but you can still work with any kind of illness, even if it's a Gemini type illness. You connect it to the rule of the sixth house.
Mm-hmm.
We have to deal with the rule of the sixth house.
Yes.
And Mercury.
Right.
You were saying as interfaced with social
The environment.
environment, and then reflected back through Virgo, or back through the Mercury. So,
No, I'm simply saying that the sixth house is an archetype. Virgo as an archetype. Mercury as an archetype. The Virgo application. Or the points that we can create ailments based on our current life as we interface with the environment. We're not born with them, in other words. Okay.
On mental disability, that would be have a Gemini connection as well as Virgo, am I right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have to unravel it with your intuition.
Yes. Yes.
Is autism to do with Mercury?
Yes.
And can you use the same word for autistic children?
Yes.
So would schizophrenia be more a 12th house thing?
Hmm?
Would schizophrenia be more a 12th house thing if, like, I've got a whole family pattern of schizophrenia?
Schizophrenia specifically is Libra, as it is linked with Pisces. Phenomena I personally see the Libra. Okay, now we'll get into, well, we were going to do some sexual stuff here with Virgo, but that's going to take a while to unravel, so. Why don't we start our lunch now and then come back at, continue on our happy journey. If there's any questions from this morning's material they'd like to ask. So yet again, this assumes we're all perfectly clear and...
We purged ourselves during lunch.
if you were just gonna, recap the archetype of Virgo into a few words, what would you say? What words would you use?
A necessary adjustment to the ego via its inner orientation to itself.
Necessary adjustment to the ego and orientation to the self.
And its orientation to itself.
And the ego's orientation to itself.
Coming from Aries through Leo. I'm the center of the universe.
So that would be the kind of the recap of the whole thing.
Yeah, because, Aries to Leo, you have obviously the dynamic of superiority if one is thinking as the center of all things.
Right.
And remembering it's a transitional archetype, leading us to Libra and beyond, meaning to prepare to be a social person. And all too often what occurs in natural law is that to counteract an extreme, it takes another extreme. Then you have a midpoint. But obviously we have an extremity coming all the way through Leo, so Virgo has to create the reverse extremity, the flipping pyramid, where the person feels now inferior instead of superior, which now leads to Libra, balance. So we're supposed to be all just equals. Nobody's better, nobody's worse.
Libra is the
Huh?
That's a balance thing as well.
That's why I would say, you know, then a necessary adjustment to the ego.
Okay.
Sure. Any other? Yeah.
When you said about when you listen to someone's voice, you're taking in the essence of this person, and then you said there's more to that. Are you also, I remember when, this is from watching a correspondence tape, but sexually osmotic another person, you do something similar when you're talking to somebody with the karma and your...
In a sense of a vibrational osmosis. That's very different than exchanging sexual fluids, believe me.
But I just, there is something that you would...
Yeah, sure. So, now we'll get into the sexual part of it, and then we'll move on to Libra. Try to remember that the way we're really defining Virgo in the way it needs to be defined, because we are still in a patriarchal reality. And we have these relevant applications of it that are determined by the patriarchy, but nonetheless, even though we can see the bullshit in it and see what the natural law is behind it, 99% of people on the planet as we speak are still living out these patriarchal paradigms. So, via Virgo, when this becomes sexualized, the very worst and most overt form that we would in fact recognize would be the overt forms of S&M type sexual activity. And, you know, let's agree that if we're going to carry around, say, a masochistic pathology, clearly a masochistic pathology is defined by pain. And the need to recreate pain. And the incredible negative interrelationship that the person has about themselves. And the feeling like they're always in this prison of pain, so to speak. And when this is then sexualized in the most overt forms, it then manifests as this sort of behavior, and sexually speaking, because what the masochist will learn in a sexual dynamic, i.e. S&M type stuff, one of the, how do they put it? Goes to the job. It's as if, illustrated. Okay, if I rub this like this on my arm long enough, I will create a sensation, yeah? They'll pretty soon start to hurt. Yes? It's an irritation. Now, we can imagine how far that could go. Now, imagine the most extreme state of that, and then suddenly I stop it. That's masochistic freedom, the other side of the pain. And that's what the sexual masochist is going for. On the other side of the That's what the inner motivation is. So clearly we can identify the overt forms of S&M sort of sexual activity, but how many could identify less overt forms and still know that to be S&M dimensions of sexual expression? That's when it starts getting tricky. For example, take a common dimension of Virgo. X has Mars in Virgo. And within himself, he's feeling as an absolutely inadequate Virgo, male sexual being. And why? Because he's comparing himself to so many external things which only reinforces his sense of inferiority. And now that he's defined himself in a sexually inferior way, now he has the partner in front of him. The typical manifestation would be, check out via masochism, to totally orientate to tuning into that person's sexual needs, harmonizing therein, satisfying therein, and the only pleasure to itself is a vicarious association with the partner. Does that sound masochistic? Yes or no? It's a common phenomenon in Virgo sexual life. And a lot of Virgos will do this and actually convince themselves they're satisfied. In effect, it's a form of sexual service, is it not? Virgo service. so in effect they can sacrifice, masochistic sacrifice, their own legitimate needs. That's quite masochistic in my view. So that would be a non-overt form. A sadistic application, let's say the same Mars and Virgo, because it can also be sadistic. And let's maybe put this Virgo Mars in the 8th house somewhere. This could then manifest as a person who had compulsive sexual attraction to sadistic sexual imagery. The symbol's an implication of, then attracts some sort of victim or partner that there's now this compulsion 8th house to act out upon, especially through displaced rage. This is what you're looking at there. Now we have the whole issue of power as a vehicle of sex now combined with sadistic orientation of sexuality. So what you have here is an individual making, in effect, in quotes, sex to the sexual imagery. And at the same time trying to tell the partner it's her or him. And when it's not, clearly that's a sadistic issue, is it not? And even including not letting the person know it's not so much them, it's just the fact they're conforming to your imagery. Do you see the less overt forms? Is it clear? I mean, you're drawing the parallels. And these things, you know, we have to be mindful of when we're having a client, and to the degree they want to be aware of themselves. And some cases of inferiority, I've seen it go so far as, particularly in a man's case, where they feel so inferior that they reduce themselves to employing the use of sexual technologies versus actual lovemaking. The sexual devices, this aid, that machine. You see my point? And never allowing themselves to get meaningfully involved other than through the vicarious extension through a device of some sort. It's going to be quite horrible when the masochism's involved. A sadistic application through Virgo, withholding sexual favors from your partner because you're pissed at them. Just had a bell go off back there.
Is it an either or can it be combined?
I'm sorry.
Is it either or?
What's either or?
Show up as either sadistic or?
No, there's some that are in fact both, depending on circumstance. And this will typically manifest in a bisexual stance.
So within just one person, they can go one way or the other?
Yeah, in a bisexual stance normally, because normally in a bisexual scenario, let's say we're dealing with a woman, she'll be masochistic with her female partners and then sadistic with the male partner, or turn it around. It will typically manifest this way. Others, see the psychological term for this stuff, it's a real nice, tidy word called passive-aggressive. When you have a passive-aggressive on your hand, you're dealing with a latent sadomasochist. And what you're describing there, based on circumstance, the individual could either be masochistic in one moment or sadistic in the next. So sadism now reacting against the masochism. They're pissed at themselves. Or conversely, if they're essentially sadistic, they can feel guilty and then turn masochistic occasionally. And I knew of a really extreme case in Germany. I'll spare you the details. Typically German details. No, that actually was my last life. That was my revenge, to be honest. That was my therapy to write about it. Because she ended up blowing up my kids and me in a way that I can even talk about it. So, so that was my revenge, to be blunt.
The woman in Germany.
That's a really gross case. And
Oh, I thought you were going to talk about it.
hmm?
I
course you do. Saturn, Mars in the 8th, right? Something like that. The underlying theme here is to, there's either a sense of inferiority describing various forms of being sexually masochistic, a sense of inadequacy there, and a desperate need to please the partner in order to feel adequate, which is the typical theme. There can be the employment of all kinds of sexual devices or aids to involve one in sexuality. The most degraded forms of sexuality you will find through this particular archetype, and or Pisces. It's polarity.
In what way, as being a Virgo being a sub-age of the Piscean age, and that's where we are now, in what way that affects our planetary sexual behavior in terms of the subtle masochism behavior?
Well, frankly, you'd be astounded to realize how many people are sexually sadomasochistic. That's a great secret in countries. Like as example, if you go to Dublin, I would say the majority themselves in S&M.
So it's actually part of the energy of the sub-age.
Well, sure, and this is where you have to link it with countries. Obviously, Germany as a country, as a collective consciousness, feels a high degree of guilt based on a sadist called Hitler. So now you see the operational motive, guilt, needing to do something about it, or I'm pissed because of. And this is why when you go to Deutschland, S&M, they have S&M clubs everywhere. They march down the streets all the time. Talk to Uli about it. He'll tell you. He's from Deutschland. And but then you go to other countries, and it's not as emphasized, depending on what their context is. But the less overt forms of S&M sexual expression, you'd be amazed how this is much more prevalent than one would realize.
That's like because people will, it sounds really normal or nice. Sometimes people like say, if it's a vicarious pleasure thing, they'll say, oh, I love to give to my partner.
Yeah, sure, that's the rationale.
And the other one, like the sexual attraction imagery, oh, let's fantasize.
Yeah, sure.
It sounds like they're experimenting with this wonderful mystery.
Those are what are called the hyper-rationalizations, to mask the actual reality.
I like to please women sexually. Are you going to run me out of here?
What's that?
I like to please women sexually.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the reason why I should change my attitude.
Who's asking you to? Okay.
So the answer is not...
The thing we were dealing with there was not, it's fine to please as long as you're not sacrificing your own needs. That's the point. When you end up sacrificing your own needs, that's when it becomes masochistic.
I'm cool.
Okay. I'm cool.
Had Virgo in both Uranus and Pluto right next to each other?
That's why that generation's so suicidal, but go ahead.
That's what I asked you. What?
Because think of their imprint. They were born at a time frame in which this basically correlates with the Cuban Missile Crisis. So what was the collective energy on our planet then? There was a few hours when we didn't know if we were going to live or die, was there? So if that becomes the collective imprint they're born into, don't you see the underlying futility? Now some also sexualized Virgo can also have yet another extreme, and that's called not being sexual at all. Asexual. No sex. And this is motivated by very distorted psychological dynamics that are linked with the fear of being contaminated because of sexuality. Think about that. Which is now rooted in some sort of twisted religious trip. And these types will be the most nervous, uptight, bitchy-orientated people that you'll ever meet. They can't even sit down. It's like they're walking around on a keg powder because they're repressing something. Powder dynamite. They have also that extreme. See, one of the great illusions as was presented in modern astrology was Virgo as the virgin. And so chaste and pure. And all this business. And but believe me, in so many cases, because of this great inner existential void, that itself motivates Virgo to be sexual. In such a way that now it can also manifest as extreme indiscriminate sexual activity. No discrimination at all, just wanting to fill themselves with one fuck, so to speak, after the next. It's a way of displacing the near existential void.
What's the original archetype of Virgo, like more like an intact goddess kind of archetype?
I'm sorry?
Was before the patriarchy, was a older archetype of Virgo like a more like intact goddess kind of thing? Or no? Before patriarchy, what was the...
There was no astrology before patriarchy. Oh, okay. Not as you know it. The way astrology was done in natural law was primarily linked with the moon, in which they'd really pay particular attention to moon phases. You can go back way back in time and find all kinds of rocks and stones where you see the moons in the various phases. But astrology, as you know it, was created by the patriarchy. The original formation of astrology had nothing to do with people's lives. Had nothing to do with personalities or individuality. It had everything to do with measuring seasons, crops. When could we expect fertility? When could we expect bad weather? This was their focus. Survival was on the line.
So are we still using a patriarchal form?
Yes, of course. And it wasn't until roughly around the Roman time in which astrology started to become somewhat personalized. And that's when the various Caesars wanted to know about themselves. And from there, it became progressive.
How about in the Oriental world where this kind of Western astrology didn't exist? They used other resources for the same purpose.
But they have their own kind of astrology, as you know, and there's even an astrology that comes out of the I Ching. And the original I Ching, believe me, was an absolute representation of natural law. From one extreme to the next, all combinations therein. So that's the beauty of the I Ching.
Is there a point where those two schools would meet, like the Western and the Eastern astrology?
Only in the sense that later Taoists derived a way of taking the birth moment or the birth time and run it back through their methodology to arrive at what they would call a natal hexagram, with what they call a controlling line, which would be equal to our ascendant. Mm-hmm. And so you have this natal hexagram equaling a birth chart, 2 trigrams combined with a controlling line, which then switches in midlife, 42, which would mirror our Uranus opposed Uranus transit, known as midlife crises. So even in ancient Chinese astrology, this was understood in such a way that your natal hexagram flip-flopped, that underneath trigram became the top one in your last part of your life. And it's really accurate stuff. For example, you guys see me as a teacher up here, and the natal hexagram I have is called number 20, and that's called the sage, the teacher. So now we ask the question, coincidence or synchronicity? Mm-hmm. And it's a pretty neat way of proving other things, like the wife I have now, we happen to be the same soul. It's a real rare situation. As it turned out, when I did her natal hexagram, out of all 64 that could be, number 20. Same controlling line. So, it's a really interesting system.
I think astrology, because it's a patriarchal thing, has to, even the work you're doing, radically change the power. Do we need a whole new paradigm beyond astrology for that kind of work?
Well, and that's what will be evolving, because just within the last few years, myself and a couple of others I've asked to do it, have been trying to show the difference between how astrology manifests from a patriarchal model versus how it manifests in a natural model. And given the fact that, again, we're at this 500-year point before the beginning of the next Aquarian age, which, by the way, is going to be an age in which there's an absolute realignment with natural law. These next 500 years are intended to accomplish that, which will occur in one way or another. Unfortunately, it's going to be a tough road. But the good news is that the extinction of the species is not at hand. In terms of possibility of a major culling of the populations, for sure. But in any case, we'll end up realigned with natural law. And so this is another reason why there are just a few now beginning to teach simultaneously. But it's also why, in terms of the world of astrology, that, like I said in the first day, I mean, progressively it's this new discipline in astrology called evolutionary astrology that people are jumping on. And obviously, since there was a person who the system came through that is defined by natural law, you see, which means the more people that buy into it,
Venus is a sex planet. Could you speak on that?
Venus is a sex planet? Well, we described some of it when we described the inner side of Taurus. We'll describe the other part of it when we describe Libra. Right now we're trying to get through Virgo. Okay. So we can also then have this opposite extreme called asexuality. And now we'll talk about the last dimension of it, and this is a bit embarrassing. So here come my sunglasses.
The corresponding life. Why are you the only one?
Because it has to be, the stupid words come through me, you get to listen. Ah, God. This is even, I'm going to turn my head around. Oh, man. You want to take over on this part, David? You know what's coming, don't you? Okay.
I'll turn against you. Actually, the last time you said it, you had me take Lizzie out of the room.
That's right, I did.
Yeah, we took a hike.
Well, because I'm a really sensitive, shy guy. I mean, I'm very different in my personal life than this teacher out here. So, let's try to ease into it. How many in the process of reading your happy books, while reading Virgo, have read this weird illusion? They never tell you why, but it's always somehow stuck in there around Virgo's linkage to pets.
Small animals.
Pets, small animals.
Like gerbils?
Just pets, just generally the word pets. Anyway, it's typically put with Virgo. They don't tell you why. And right on. And of course the word is bestiality. And this is specific to Virgo. And also, you know, remember I've counseled over 20,000 clients and I've heard every story in spades. And there are, again, much to your, I'm sure, your amazement, many, primarily women who have such an interest. And of course, they're utterly humiliated by it, embarrassed to talk about it. But when I do my work, people tend to treat me as a priest. So I get a lot of confessions. And Pisces moon stuff, you know. And I've heard it all. Much to my own detriment, I might add, in certain cases. But in any case, I want to show you where this comes from so you'll know how to deal with it when you do counseling work and it's suddenly in your face. And what this connects to is, it goes all the way back to the issue of natural law, how people originally lived on our planet for the majority of their time. It was common practice up and through around 6500 BCE for women to unite with a variety of animals. The primary animal in that time, by the way, was a bull. The bull is the most revered of all animals. And also a variety of plant life, remembering that people of natural living understand that consciousness is in every form within the creation, and that every form has a teaching that is unique to it, which is then the intention of uniting with these sorts of forms sexually, to have an exchange of consciousness. Now, if you doubt this, there are books I can suggest you read to prove it to yourself, but the most dramatic one, there is a cave. Because of matriarchy via the European continent, the last place that died out was to the southwest of Munich. And there are still caves there that you can go walk in, where there are cave paintings. And in one of these caves, that's the most graphic of all symbols, there's a woman on her back. She's fully pregnant, legs, and on top of her is a bull with an erection pointed right at her vagina. Now, there's not too many ways you can interpret that. So, unless you're a real Puritan. And so there you have it. And so this is also part of natural law. And when it's then connected back through Virgo, because Virgo does have a natural affinity for animal life. Why? From a Virgo Piscean perspective, animals are much more innocent Pisces than human people. And as a result, Virgos have learned that some of their best relationships are, of course, with animals. They're just unconditionally given, and versus people. And this is why Virgos really benefit with having animals in their life. So, this is the connection to bestiality. So the bottom line is that you will have clients like this. And when you do, 99% will be utterly confused. Why do I have this need or desire? And now that you know the natural law behind it, don't you see how that would create some real relief in that sort of client? That maybe they're not quite as weird as they were thinking? Yes or no? I got through it.
Counsel the patient that it's all right.
No, I would say if you're feeling fine with this, doing something positive for you, why change it?
Nobody's getting hurt.
Nobody's getting hurt. You're not making that animal be sexual with you. So, and see here again, you can test this shit out through, like we said earlier, you know, when you come up with times, why is it that their creation stories are 90% distorted incest stories? And then next to realize, because by that time, of course, it was clearly patriarchal, the question becomes, why is it that some of the more cruel Caesars, like Caligula and some others, would then, as a form of punishment, have people literally killed by having certain kind of animals penetrate them. Common practice. That's what historical revisionists don't want you to know.
I remember seeing once in TV, those kind of like Discovery Channel, that in certain African tribes, like they have this belief of cutting women's clit.
Yeah.
And also they penetrate a snake in their vagina. As actually, I don't know why. I don't.
Because the snake is the classic symbol for Kundalini, the serpent. It was even used in stupid Garden of Eden myth, obviously. How many of you realize, by the way, see, Christians in the Bible and the Vatican don't want you to know that Adam actually had a wife before Eve. Lilith. He had one, Lilith, the original wild woman that he had to divorce. So he no, he wanted a malleable Eve, a masochist. He wanted a woman who was free within herself. It's the last thing Christians want. So it's like, let's face it. Lilith had many children to the wild woman. That the closest example that you will have in your modern literature that would equal the original Lilith is that book that came out years ago, Woman Runs with Wolves or Dances with Wolves or something like that.
That out of the myth. They took that part out of the myth. Or
The Christian people took it away.
but that was part of the original myth.
Yes.
The wild woman.
Right, Lilith. See, that's the thing when you do astrology, you can get a program that will put Lilith in your birth chart.
Okay.
But the one that does that is Solar Far, and it puts, because there's actually 3 Liliths.
The black moon.
Black moons. And that's a perfect reflection of the Trinity. And if you bring it through time, the first Lilith correlates with the original pure Lilith, the original wild woman, which would correlate with the original femininity, not only in all women, but all men. The second Lilith is the most distorted one, as caused by the patriarchy. This would then demonstrate, whether it's male or female, where they are most distorted relative to their own femininity. And the third one is the resolution Lilith, meaning we're all the way up into, 1999. And what that symbol is how to integrate the purity of the original Lilith into the context of our life, 1999. The house and sign of that third Lilith tells you how to do such a thing. I got lost.
So Lilith, so the 3 Liliths, there's 3 that can be in the chart? I'm not sure I understood that. I understood the concept of the 3, but...
Yeah, there are 3.
In your chart.
Yeah, but you can't, there's no astrology program that puts all 3. But there is an asteroid program that shows you all 3. That comes out with Mark Pottinger's asteroid thing.
What's the one that's commonly put in?
The last one, Black Moon.
Can I digress for just a little bit for one quick question? So bestiality is a natural thing?
Yes, because what it connects to, and there's an old Latin word, it's a wonderful word, and I'm not, the Latin word is called Daemon, D-A-E-M-O-N.
D-A-E.
Yes, whereas the Christian perversion of this word is demon.
Right.
If you read the old Latin dictionary, the way daemon is defined, this is now the dictionary speaking, a human soul that has fused itself with the world of nature in general, and specifically the world of animal and plants. And when the fusion has occurred, this soul becomes a messenger of God. So, obviously Sagittarius is connected to Virgo, Gemini, Pisces. Now you see, as daemon, as a concept, the Sagittarius, as an archetype.
Does this have beast, have human?
This is this original symbolism of the centaur. And the Christians want to interpret that as humankind, or primarily man, trying to remove himself from all instincts of animal world and animal life and to rise above it, the whole bullshit of transcendence.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas the natural interpretation of the centaur is in fact to be in union with nature. It depends how one interprets something.
That's why it comes natural law for
Yes, and so when we bring this through Sagittarius, or Virgo, then you have this application. It's natural.
There is no reproduction that ever could take place between humans and animals.
Well, that's also a matter of speculation. For example, the very first story that was promoted by the Romans to explain the beginnings of Rome. Do you know the story? Wolves. This is a situation. Okay, so the point being that wolf mated with a human to produce twins, which then became these two twins then became the original pillars or origins of Rome. So, any questions on Virgo?
Is it faithful or what was it that you were using for every sign?
Monogamous.
Exact. Monogamous or not monogamous?
Virgo? It can be naturally monogamous. But see, you know, I think that a really valid co-ruler of Virgo days anyway should be Chiron. Especially the links with the masochistic part of it. I mean, a lot of people want to understand Chiron's simple concept of wounded healer. The healer is wounded because it hasn't acknowledged its limits. That's masochistic.
Barbara, that really good book in Cologne, Barbara.
Hand Clow.
Good book.
Yeah, it is a good book. Okay, so we'll move right in along on our happy journey and move into Libra. So now we see that we've reached the first sign that's actually virtually above the horizon. And we're now starting, this is a cardinal archetype, energy moving out from the center. It's clearly a yang archetype, energy moving out from the center. Clearly ruled by the planet Venus, the projected needs, therefore energy moving out from the center. And it's air. So this is clearly the impetus, archetypically, to accelerate the expansion of consciousness, to progressively embrace the whole, the totality of creation itself. This is where we are meant to learn that we are an equal among people. Not superior, not inferior, absolutely co-equal. And that's like, for a simple example, when you live a natural life, and again I've lived with Navajo a long time, the shaman and the corn picker are absolutely equal. They simply consider themselves to have a role, co-equal role, to play on behalf of the totality of their tribe. And neither role is better or worse than the other. But of course, when we pervert this with the patriarchy, all too often, the Libra archetype is experienced as extremity versus balance, i.e. equal. But in any case, this archetype is the real archetype that is now beginning to embrace the social order, in which we learn to initiate a diversity of relationships with a diversity of types, in order by way of the Aryan polarity, to understand the very specific nature of our individuality, through comparison, evaluation, and contrast to others. After all, the word individual can never even be used unless there's other individuals. So we learn about our individuality through comparison and contrast by initiating the diversity. And when you connect it back to the Aquarian archetype, this is also links it in its own way to a process of elimination. I'm not this, I'm not that. So this is one of the impulses. This is also when we begin to become aware of the diversity of reality. to the diversity of ideas, the diversity of value associations. And as modern times increase, the diversity of the world itself. This is trying to teach us that reality is in fact relative. And that the only real absolute, as Einstein pointed out, is relativity itself. There's no way in human form that you can know ultimate reality. Every form has an implied limit. You want to experience it very quickly? Who created it? Therein you just experience a limitation of human consciousness. So don't think you can know it. You can't. The only way you can really know it is through illusion and analogy. That which points to something else. That's why Jesus taught in the way he taught, or Buddha taught in the way he taught. So, from the point of view of consciousness in human form, believe me, the only absolute is relativity itself. Even the thing you call time is not an absolute. It's relative. How time is experienced is relative. So, it's beginning to teach us this actual reality, and it's initially experienced for most, just simply through the diversity and relativity of people types. And that should be dramatic enough, yes? So, and this is where we're literally learning how to be aware of others before we're aware of ourselves. And as a result, this archetype correlates with the psychology of listening, hearing, learning how to identify another person's reality as it actually exists for them versus our subjective projection of our reality on their reality. It is where we learn to give to another according to what they actually need versus what we think they need. This is where we learn to ask others for what we need. Think about that. You're not going to read that in an astrology book. So then the question becomes, what is our way of asking anybody to help us? What is your unique style? Determine this by the sign on the cusp, locational ruler, aspects being made. You know, some simple example, I've got Taurus on the 7th, it's ruled by Venus retrograde in the 1st, square Pluto, Saturn. If somebody says, what do you need? What do you think my typical answer is? I need nothing. I'm fine. Scorpio stoicism. Coming through Swedish blood, right? The ultimate stoicism. You see the point? So then the question, that would mean in that case, that asshole doesn't even know how to ask for what it needs. Let's face it. See how it works. You could put it in other combinations. You could put that Venus down there in the 4th house, run it through Pisces. A lot of times that would manifest as an individual, a cliche that would fit it, the crying wolf syndrome.
What?
Crying wolf syndrome. It's an American fable. Something's always wrong all the time. See what I mean? Help me, help me, help me, all the time. Crying wolf syndrome.
Remember that?
I grew up in a country shop.
How many in this room have never known that type of person? They're so fucking desperate. So, what I'm talking about is your styles of asking for what one needs. You can determine this right through the darn birth chart.
Isn't that one of the root causes of a lot of disease, is the inability to receive? and ability to receive what we need.
That's true. And you will find in all those cases, and you will find one common denominator in all those cases for a person who does not know how to receive or won't allow it to receive. And you will find in all cases an incredibly negative self-relationship.
It goes back to say now.
Right. So we're going through this process of comparison and contrast, and we're learning how to identify other people's reality as they exist for them. We're learning about the relativity of reality. We're also learning how to receive here. It is a Venus archetype. See what happens in Libra because of extremity. Given the fact you have a square to Cancer, and remembering that entering social life is real new in this archetype. And that implies an automatic insecurity, Cancer square. So one of the compensatory behavior, one of the ways people compensate for this stuff. They try to put themselves in a relationship in such a way as they create a dynamic that we can call the need to be needed, which is now somehow trying to guarantee Cancer security. Oh, they need me. But this creates its own kind of extreme where they can't be given too. You see it? So that you have to monitor this one. It's a classic application of the 7, especially when you find Pluto there. Just this issue called the need to be needed. And what happens in these cases is that they reach such an extreme that it will then finally kick in this Aryan polarity. And this means on an occasional basis, they end up getting so angry and so pissed off that they'll take a small amount of time and just say, the heck with everybody, and lock themselves away somewhere. And the reason for that is they've given so much, there's nothing left to give. And they have to replenish. And the only way they know that is through an extremity equaling the Aryan reaction. But the key in Libra, for any Libra, remembering the Aryan polarity, and Aries again is our instinct, via the Libra archetype, when that Libra type is feeling the instinct to be alone, to honor it when it occurs. If they can follow the instinctual nature like that, I need to be around people, I need to be alone now, I need to do, then they affect balance. But only by honoring the instinct. And see, all too often when this dynamic of needing to be needed is the operational deal, then they won't even honor the instinct. Oh, this one needs me now. And on it goes. So in that sense, they're not even giving to themselves, let alone asking someone else to give them something. And we have to remember Cancer squares Libra. There's a need to be nurtured here. Yes? One of the classic problems of Libra, when it becomes so dependent on social situations and people outside of itself, classic problem called indecision. The fear of making wrong choice. And that's because they have so many other people's ideas in their head plus their own. Now via the Aryan polarity competition, the ideas are competing. Fear of making wrong choice. And they remain indecisive. Another classic application, the whole phenomenon of expectations. Remember, the externalized Venus is that which makes us aware of what we need, which in our own current reality or estimation we can't supply. That being the case, you see the automatic connection to expectations, which via air get projected. And this itself is its own dynamic in relationships, is it not? One's expectations. What happens if they're not fulfilled?
Deception.
Hmm?
Deception.
Disillusionment.
Do that stuff.
But yet a lot of times why the expectations aren't being fulfilled is because the person who, without knowing it, needs to take care of their own business around those expectations. You see? So they create a situation of apparent lack in order to enforce the lesson. How many in this room feel you without expectation? How many in this room feel you have no expectations towards other people? But it's also the expectations we have towards ourselves, i.e. the Aries polarity.
Would Capricorn be the takers?
Hmm?
Capricorn be the takers?
Takers?
The people that have no problem asking for what they need.
That'd be more in the area of Leo.
Well, I was thinking of Capricorn's reputation for being users. Is that...
That's for different, that's typically linked with ambitions of a socialized nature.
Okay.
But in terms of their personal life, they tend to be highly repressed on an emotional level. Most carry a very silent expectation that says other people should just know what I need without even me putting the words on it. And it affects its own kind of stoicism. And then, as a result, suffering. Because, of course, those expectations won't be met if they're not... They create their own... Capricorn moon people know this. Yes. Sure. This is the center of its universe. You know, I have a real good friend, Noel Till, and the guy's got Leo moon, and that's a funny story, but in his house, he virtually has a throne that he sits there on. Years ago, his students would come to his house. He would sit in his throne. They would all... And it was a formal throne.
Sagittarius is more like a king.
That looks like a throne you sit on.
The appearances only, my friend.
You got the long hair of Leo.
Hey, if men weren't supposed to have long hair, they wouldn't. If God didn't intend men to have long hair, he wouldn't. All the short hair business is a conditioning thing. Huh? You think about it. Why do men have short hair? You see the automatic conformity to social pressure, the fear of being different, the fear of social ostracization. Myself, I could give a shit.
That's obvious.
What do you say?
That's obvious. That's obvious.
Oh. Is it that obvious? Really? Is it that obvious?
I'd say so.
Okay.
I'm down with it, though.
But, I mean, think about
I've
that.
gotten that myself in recent years. So
Yeah.
I don't really give a damn what anybody thinks.
Well, it's what's so neat, and see, I'll give you a story, an actual history of where this natural law is so wonderful at that level. Because where the matriarchy / natural law really died out with respect to white people. Died out in the 4th century AD on the island called Creta. And at the height of their history, men and women looked identical. The hair length, they wore the same clothes, they wore the same ornaments, same perfumes. This is just how blended they had become. And you can still go to the island of Creta and look into the ancient caves, and then you can see all this stuff still there. And to me, that is the greatest illustration of natural peoples. When you reach a place of that kind of equality, where you can't even look at the person and tell the difference between the man and woman.
Why did it vanish?
White people, affecting war on their island, called Christianity. Called Christianity.
Oh, that.
Oh, that.
Big sword, big gun.
This issue that you were speaking about, this Virgo sadistic removal of the clitoris, this comes out of Islam.
Of what?
Islam. And the aim is so they can absolutely remove any potential for pleasure in the woman.
Some African tribes too. Some African tribes too.
That's true too. That's true.
Where does it come from?
The same patriarchy. It's a fear of a woman being a woman. It's a patriarchal dominance.
Too powerful.
Ah, sure.
Huh?
They even sew it up.
That's true.
Yeah, this thing called patriarchy, in the different places I've traveled and lived, it seems that that same archetype is manifesting pretty much all over the world in one form or another.
Which archetype?
The patriarchal archetype.
Yeah, sure.
It just, it wasn't so much like it began with white Christianity and then spread. It was arising simultaneously.
Oh, of course it was. And it was sad, it's even infused a lot of natural living, like take this thing people nowadays want to call shamanism. And that is the word one would use in English to describe natural law. But how much of current shamanism has itself been infused by the patriarchy? A simple example, one of the greatest patriarchal illusions, spiritually speaking, that they promote is that for spiritual growth to occur, one must suffer first. Look at this preposterous assumption. And how many of us have taken in? So, link this to some forms of shamanism, i.e., the Sune, and the thing they call the sun dance, that you're supposed to get a vision for your life. Well, how do they affect it? You end up running a piece of metal through your nipple, and now hang suspended off a rope. Well, you're going to get a vision, all right. But don't you see this issue of suffering preceding? So even a lot of modern shamanism has been messed over.
Flagellation. Flagellation.
Yeah.
In terms of the history of planet Earth, isn't this patriarchy and what we're living now part of our evolution to reach a point of equality in the Aquarian age, maybe?
That's the point.
So we have to live this anyway.
This just beginning now. This was a century, for those that have heard of him, the great astrologer called Dane Rujar. He predicted in this century in all kinds of fields of life there'd be a few seed people, is what he called them, seed people, that were given the vision of the old/new paradigms to come. Because we're at this 500-year point that starts in this decade. And indeed, that's come to pass. But the ones that have this original vision are the ones who feel most lonely.
And they're the ones that have to the structures, the old structures, create the new paradigm.
Right.
It's almost like when they said you had to suffer in order to spiritually go. Now it almost is like you have to heal in order to spiritually go.
Right. Which means healing what? All the old bullshit. Realigning with natural principles.
But in this patriarchy, then suffering as part of the natural experience of patriarchy and the religions, suffering has been a way to reach that healing point or cleansing point.
It's all been necessary, is another way to put it.
Yeah, it's been.
That's the mind fuck. It's all been necessary.
Yeah.
That truly is mine.
Yeah, we're moving to something new.
You have to suffer pain in order to be purified. Isn't that the efficacy phrase that you were saying earlier?
In the context and time frame we're coming from, because we always have to look at it relative to context, That had to occur for us to realize the illusion that it did not have to occur. But even before that, it didn't occur. So then the question becomes, why did we have to drop into that space in the first place? That's just God checking itself out. That's what we need to remember, the root point behind it. This whole Christian story, or the original story, the great flood, and all this, it actually occurred. And in the way a lot of people would interpret that is that this is simply God getting pissed off at what it had created. Small break. The archetype of marriage. It's not. Marriage as such is sacred. Now, think about this historically. The relationship was not considered a marriage until it was, in quotes, consummated. Have sex with the person. That's an A-house issue. So, what happens in the seventh? This is the process of elimination. Meaning, in the seventh house that we learn,
Maybe when you talk about Capricorn.
You can see how much I'm connected to. This is where we learn what kind of relationships are what. This one's going to be a friend, this one I can like a little bit, this one I can like a lot. This is my mother, this is my father, this is my brother, sister. And progressively we begin to learn whom through a process of elimination. We want to make choice making being eighth house, a choice to commit ourselves to by way of intimacy. And this is why 8th house Scorpio Pluto is your real marriage house. In a similar way, when we're talking about Taurus and we're talking about this issue of pheromones, which is Taurus, the natural scent of the body, which serves as natural selection, who's ending up with who, the actual registering of that scent occurs initially in the nose, which then ignites the hypothalamus. And that smelling of that scent, to smell, is a Venus, Libra, 7th house issue. And this then leads right back into the 8th house. This is the one I will sleep with. See how that follows.
Does that hold true for other types of partnerships, business partnerships and so forth also? Why am I mistaken in thinking the seventh was?
That's the initiation of a relationship with diversity, in which we progressively connect to diversity of types. This one finally coming into a business thing or a sex thing, or I don't want to know you at all,
Or agents. Or agents as in horary astrology.
Yeah, right.
That's cool. I'm screwed up for a lot of you. Give them a lot of dumb information.
So now we get into some of the physiological, anatomical, and the sexual. Obviously with Venus in mind here, via Libra, it restates the entire issue of the white blood cells and kidneys and all those anatomical correlations we talked about in Taurus, of course, all reflected in Libra. I guess I don't know if this actually would be applied to it, but I don't know if it can connect with anatomy and physiology in the sense that the Venus, Libra, the externalized, is obviously concerned with its appearance, i.e. persona, i.e. what clothes we're wearing, what perfumes we may be putting on, how we're decorating ourselves, how we even decorate where we live. But in my mind, there's a direct connection to what is happening in our bodies via how we are decorating that body. Do you know what I'm saying? If a person has a really ugly relationship to themselves, and let's say, for example, they don't wash their clothes for a long time, or just wear rags, they don't care what's on, I mean, what is the clear symbol here?
Self-image.
Versus somebody who's feeling good about themselves. You see my point? So I think there's a direct connection there. In fact, you can do a lot physiologically and anatomically with a person just by messing with different colors in their space. Like, especially when you know, as an example, which chakra is most weak or most susceptible to this or that, or colors counteract something else. So, for example, the volunteer thing, years ago up in the state of Washington, and one of my personal interests there was to study insane people. And so I went and volunteered my services for a place up called Washington Hospital, which is an insane asylum. We made a lot of discoveries there, and what we found in all cases was an extremely irregular or dysfunctional pineal gland in all cases, which of course secretes a key hormone called melatonin. And for those involved with natural living or metaphysical reality or whatever, you realize the color that will stabilize the pineal gland is a form of blue. And there's a color of blue in general, but there's a specific blue. Because the color that emanates from the pineal gland is blue. Well, I learned to take the photography inside the body. Pineal gland's blue. So of course, and when you go to these hospitals, the typical color is on the wall mustard green. And I actually walked up to the head place, you know, I don't give a shit who I piss off. And I was trying to be Pisces, you know. Why don't you try some of these ideas, you know? Paint your walls blue. Try these breathing exercises, which will stabilize the pineal. They didn't care less. They didn't want to hear it. They were invested in their making money and the drug administration and keeping drugged and less work for us. And it was amazing. But there's an example where color can actually have such an effect.
Does that help schizophrenics?
Yes.
Because I know someone who's a schizophrenic and he loves blue.
Blue is the color for stability.
For stability?
Psychological stability, emotional stability. That is the color of creation. You know, when they finally split the atom, you know what color came out? Blue. When you look at the pineal gland, which secretes this key hormone called melatonin, which ultimately intent is spiritualized consciousness, blue. When you see the famous third eye, one of the main colors, blue. Blue is the color that correlates with what we want to call God, Goddess. So lo and behold, it stabilizes the psyche. So, in any case, maybe you guys would work with this idea of appearance and its impact on one's anatomy and physiology. I think there's a direct connection there. And that connection will be seen through these archetypes for those that choose to work on it. That's her yard. Protecting her friends. So, and remember, you know, you've got a square to Cancer here. Emotion. Now, on a sexual level, clearly, Libra of itself, sexually speaking, desires cleanliness, number one. In other words, Libra sexualized is not going to appreciate the dirty fingernails, so to speak. Or showing up with sweat on your body and smelling horrible and greasy clothes. This is not going to work. That's the biggest turnoff for Libra. Point here, sexually, Libra needs what we can call ambiance, sexual ambiance, to create supercharged atmospheres that precede the sexual event. The incense, the wine, the intimate conversation, the fireplace, leading to that event. Now remember, Aries didn't give a shit. The back of the car seat was just fine, thank you. It's quite the opposite via Libra. You got it. And cleanliness, ambiance, proper behavior, dignity, respect, all these are prerequisites. Left is a note. You know, and a good way to illustrate this is an example when you start going into other times and places and centuries. Libra has a direct correlation with original Rome and original Greece. And that's why all folks who have Neptune and Libra have a direct affinity for that time. That's why in that generation, all the mythology came back to life and all the rest of it. But even why some of the astrologers started doing mythology stuff in their astrology. And Aaron Sullivan's a great example. But, you know, in Rome, there was typically Libra sexually. Everything, sexuality was so much linked with atmospheres and preparation. For example, one of the greatest things the Romans enjoyed was what we would call erotic dancing. There was actual schools for young women to go, and they would learn these erotic arts called dancing. And a typical sexual experience for a typical Roman couple, the woman always starting off a sexual event with some form of erotic dancing. And this is my point about creating supercharged atmospheres. This is where it comes from in our psyche via Libra. There's a tremendous amount of natural sexual grace in Libra. There's sexual beauty, actually. When the connectors are put together in the right way, the atmosphere, the requirements, there's an incredible sexual beauty and grace that comes out of Libra sexualized. It would be sort of like watching the statue of Aphrodite make love, so to speak. That kind of grace. It's really nice to behold. And they're really obviously exceptional at tuning in to the sexual emotional reality of their partner. It's just a natural way of tuning in that comes back to this issue of wanting to give, wanting to please. And therefore, by having that capacity, and they have an inbuilt ability to harmonize with that partner. Doesn't necessarily mean that that partner's harmonizing with them, but they can harmonize with that partner in such a way to truly create a total sense of sexual satisfaction for that partner, obviously if they're being tuned into. But when we connect this back to the need to be needed, some of these folks learn this about themselves in such a way that they create sexual dependencies on themselves from others. Not too bad. And And that will classically happen. And another way to look at that, if you've got finally a lover who's tuned into you, are you going to be looking elsewhere?